Some storms bring more than rain. They bring reckoning. In the fading light of a Wisconsin autumn, the clouds gather over fields that have witnessed 3 generations of sacrifice. A farmer stands alone, watching 40 years of sweat and calluses dissolve into foreclosure notices and broken promises. At 62, he has nothing left to lose. But the downpour that threatens his harvest brings something unexpected. Tires screeching against wet asphalt, a sedan plunging into rising waters, and a woman with secrets worth killing for. They come for her in black SUVs, men with cold eyes and government lies. They don't know that before he worked this land. He hunted men in jungles half a world away. Before he was forgotten, he was feared. 2 strangers from different worlds, brought together by a storm that washes away pretense. She carries evidence that could topple an empire. He carries memories of a time when right and wrong weren't just words in a foreclosure letter. Sometimes salvation wears mud-caked boots. Sometimes justice needs calloused hands to deliver it. The rain fell in angry sheets across the Wisconsin countryside, turning the already softened autumn earth into a treacherous quagmire. Jack Thornton stood at the edge of his cornfield, shoulders hunched against the downpour, watching 40 years of work slowly drowning before his eyes. At 62, the lines on his weathered face had deepened considerably in recent months, each one a testament to another sleepless night spent poring over financial statements that refused to balance. The corn stalks bent in submission to the wind, their golden tassels heavy with moisture. He'd delayed the harvest by 3 days, hoping for better weather, a decision that might now cost him dearly. The foreclosure notice from Heartland Regional Bank had arrived just yesterday, its clinical language outlining how 4 generations of Thornton family history could be erased with a stroke of a banker's pen. "God damn corporate vultures," he muttered, tasting the bitterness of the words as they left his mouth. The letter from Eastern AgriCorp sat in his kitchen, their latest generous offer to buy Sunset Ridge Farm marked with yesterday's date. $450,000 in debt had a way of making even insulting offers seem tempting. 3 generations of Thorntons had worked this land, and now he might be the one to lose it all. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Land is the only thing they ain't making more of, son. You hold on to it, no matter what." Easy advice from a man who'd farmed in better times, before the agricultural conglomerates had squeezed small farmers to the breaking point, before climate change had made the weather as unpredictable as the markets. Lightning split the darkening sky, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his boots. The storm was directly overhead now. Time to head back. His old border collie, Scout, pressed against his leg, equally eager to escape the worsening tempest. "All right, old boy, let's go." Jack turned toward the farmhouse when a sound cut through the drumming rain, the unmistakable screech of tires on wet asphalt, followed by the sickening crunch of metal. His head snapped toward the county road that bordered his eastern property. Through the curtain of rain, he could make out headlights veering wildly. Then a car plunging off the road and into the drainage ditch that separated his land from the highway. Without hesitation, Jack broke into a run, Scout at his heels. Age might have slowed him somewhat, but 40 years of farm work had kept him stronger than most men his age. His knees protested war injuries from another lifetime, compounded by decades of physical labor, but he pushed through the pain, a lifetime of putting necessity before comfort, guiding his movements. He reached the drainage ditch in time to see the sedan sinking nose first into the rapidly rising water, its tail lights still glowing red through the murk. The ditch, normally just a shallow trough, had transformed into a fast-moving stream under the torrential downpour. "Hello, anyone in there?" he shouted, already splashing into the water. The driver's side window was cracked but intact. Through it, Jack could see a woman slumped over the steering wheel, a trickle of blood running down her forehead. The water was rising fast, already reaching the bottom of the door. Jack tugged at the door handle. Locked. He pounded on the window. "Ma'am, wake up!" The woman stirred slightly but didn't regain consciousness. The water level crept higher, now seeping into the vehicle through the damaged body seams. Jack looked around desperately for something to break the window. Finding nothing but soft earth and water, muscle memory from another lifetime took over. Jack's elbow smashed through the window in one practice movement, the safety glass crumbling away. He reached through, unlocked the door, and wrenched it open against the pressure of the rising water. The woman was perhaps in her mid-50s, her silver-streaked dark hair plastered against her pale face. She wore expensive clothes, tailored pants, a cashmere sweater, both now soaked and muddied. A delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, shaped like a theatrical mask, glinted at her throat, a detail that might have given Jack a clue to her identity had he been paying attention to such things. Jack unfastened her seatbelt and carefully pulled her from the vehicle, noting with professional detachment that she was lighter than expected, almost fragile in his arms. As he carried her up the slippery embankment, the beam of approaching headlights cut through the rain. Two black SUVs pulled to a stop on the shoulder of the road, their engines idling ominously. Something about their deliberate positioning sent a warning signal to instincts Jack hadn't needed in decades. He paused, the unconscious woman cradled against his chest, and watched as four men emerged from the vehicles. They wore dark raincoats over what looked like tactical gear, moving with the coordinated precision that Jack recognized all too well. Not good Samaritans coming to help. Then, "Sir," one of them called out, his voice carrying an artificial politeness that did nothing to mask the command underneath. "We'll take it from here. That woman is wanted for questioning." Jack adjusted his stance slightly, balancing the woman's weight while freeing up his right side. "You fellas with the sheriff's department," he called back, already knowing the answer. The leader's hesitation was brief but telling. "Federal agents, hand her over now. No badges displayed, no proper identification offered." Jack had spent enough time with genuine law enforcement during his years on the county board to know these men were not federal agents of any kind. The rain pounded harder, visibility dropping further as the storm intensified. Lightning illuminated the scene in flashes, giving it a surreal, staccato quality that reminded Jack of combat photography from his war days. "Well now, seeing as she's injured, I think the hospital is the proper place for her," Jack replied, projecting a country simplicity he hadn't genuinely possessed since before Vietnam. "You boys can question her once the doctors have had a look." Two of the men began advancing toward him. Scout growled, hackles raised despite the soaking rain. "This is not a negotiation," the leader said, all pretense of politeness gone. "Give us the woman." Jack had exactly one advantage. They wanted the woman alive, which meant they couldn't risk shooting. He, on the other hand, had nothing to lose but his own life, which at this point didn't seem worth all that much anyway. "Scout, home!" he commanded sharply. The border collie hesitated only a moment before turning and racing toward the farmhouse. Good dog. No sense in both of them dying out here. The first man reached Jack, hands outstretched to take the woman. In one fluid motion that belied his age, Jack pivoted, using the man's own momentum to send him face first into the muddy embankment. The move sent a jolt of pain through his bad knee, a reminder of the shrapnel he still carried from Da Nang. The second attacker was more cautious, circling slightly. "You're making a mistake. Old man," he warned, hand moving toward his waistband. "Wouldn't be my first," Jack replied grimly. The man lunged. Jack sidestepped as best he could while carrying the woman, but age and the awkward burden slowed him. A fist connected with his ribs, sending a bolt of pain through his side. But the military training of his youth, reinforced by decades of hard farm labor, hadn't entirely abandoned him. Jack's boot found his attacker's knee with brutal precision, accompanied by a sickening crack. The man went down with a howl of pain. The other two were advancing now, and Jack knew he couldn't fight them all while protecting the unconscious woman. Instead, he turned and ran toward the tree line that bordered his property, not toward the farmhouse where they would surely look first, but toward the old hunting cabin his father had built deep in the woods. He'd maintained it over the years out of respect for his father's memory, though he rarely used it for actual hunting anymore. His boots sank into the mud with each step, making his progress slower and more laborious than he would have liked. The woman's weight, light as she was, began to tell on muscles that hadn't been called to such urgent action in years. The pounding rain reduced visibility to mere feet, which worked both for and against him, hard to follow, but also hard to navigate. The men shouted behind him, their voices nearly drowned out by the storm. Jack pushed through the pain in his side, grateful for his knowledge of the terrain. The darkness and rain would work in his favor, as would the thick underbrush that separated his cornfields from the forest beyond. Few people knew these woods as he did. Every game trail, every creek bed, every fallen log that could trip up a pursuer. By the time he reached the shelter of the trees, his lungs were burning, and the woman felt impossibly heavy in his arms. But the sounds of pursuit had faded somewhat, giving him a momentary advantage. Jack followed a barely visible path, moving as quickly and quietly as possible through the darkened forest. The rain continued its relentless assault, dripping through the canopy above. But at least the trees provided some shelter from the worst of it. A flash of lightning illuminated the woods briefly, giving Jack his bearings. The cabin was still a quarter-mile ahead, tucked into a small clearing beside a stream that was likely overflowing its banks in this downpour. He adjusted his course slightly, using an old oak tree split by lightning years ago as a landmark. His mind, trained by war to remain analytical even in crisis, cataloged the situation while his body pushed forward automatically. Unknown woman, unconscious, professional pursuers, likely private security or mercenaries given their equipment and tactics. No identification shown, which meant whatever they were doing wasn't officially sanctioned. The woman herself was expensively dressed, well-groomed despite her current state. Someone with means then. Someone important enough to warrant a professional recovery team. After 20 minutes of careful progress, the small cabin came into view, a simple structure of weathered logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. Jack had always kept it stocked with basic supplies for hunting trips or the occasional ice fishing expedition. Now, he was grateful for that habit of preparedness. He managed to get the door open without dropping his burden, then gently laid the woman on the small cot against one wall. She remained unconscious, though her breathing seemed regular. The cut on her forehead had mostly stopped bleeding, but would need cleaning. Jack quickly closed and bolted the door, then moved to the windows, drawing the heavy curtains against any searching eyes. Only then did he allow himself a moment to catch his breath, leaning against the rough-hewn table as his side throbbed in protest. He was getting too old for this kind of excitement. The cabin was cold and dark. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, lighting the oil lamps that hung from hooks in the ceiling, then kneeling at the stone fireplace to build a fire. All the while, he kept glancing at the mysterious woman on the cot, wondering what kind of trouble he'd just invited into his life. Once the fire was crackling in the grate, casting a warm glow throughout the small space, Jack turned his full attention to his unexpected guest. In the better light, he could see that her face was bruised in places that had nothing to do with the car accident, older contusions in various stages of healing. The realization stirred something dark and angry inside him, memories of his own mother's face bearing similar marks before his father finally drank himself to death. She was beautiful, in a mature, dignified way that had nothing to do with the artificial standards of youth-obsessed culture. Her face bore the lines of experience, of a life fully lived, which only enhanced rather than diminished her natural elegance. Even unconscious and bedraggled, there was something compelling about her presence that filled the small cabin. Jack found the first aid kit he kept stocked and began gently cleaning the cut on her forehead. As he worked, the woman's eyes fluttered open, eyes of a striking amber color that seemed to catch and hold the firelight. For a moment, confusion clouded her gaze. Then fear replaced it as she jerked away from his touch. "Easy now," Jack said, keeping his voice low and calming, the same tone he used with injured animals. "You're safe. Your car went off the road in the storm." The woman's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in her surroundings with quick intelligence. "Where am I? Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse but carried a clear, almost musical quality that seemed at odds with her current disheveled state. Name's Jack Thornton. This is my hunting cabin. My farm's about a mile that way, he gestured vaguely. Found you unconscious after your car went into the ditch. Brought you here because... He hesitated, unsure how to explain the men who had pursued them. Because they found me, she finished for him, her expression hardening. The men in the black SUVs? Jack nodded slowly. Claimed to be federal agents. Weren't showing badges, though, and they seemed mighty eager to get their hands on you. He paused, studying her face. Want to tell me why that might be? The woman pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing slightly. She touched the cut on her forehead gingerly, then looked at the blood on her fingertips with detached interest, as if cataloging just another inconvenience in what had clearly been a string of them. My name is Beth, she said after a moment, the lie transparent in her hesitation. And the less you know, the safer you'll be. I should go. I've already put you in danger. She attempted to stand but swayed dangerously, forcing her to sit back down. Not going anywhere in this storm, Jack said firmly. And those men are still out there looking. Besides, you might have a concussion. They'll find me, she insisted, a note of genuine fear in her voice. They always do. Not here, they won't, Jack replied with quiet certainty. Nobody knows about this place except me and my daughter, and she's in New York City. We can stay here tonight, then figure out your next move in the morning. Thunder boomed directly overhead, as if nature itself was emphasizing his point. The cabin walls seemed to vibrate with the force of it. The woman, Beth, regarded him with wary calculation, clearly weighing her limited options. Finally, she nodded, a small gesture of surrender to circumstance. Please, she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Don't call the police. I promise I'll be gone tomorrow. Jack studied her for a long moment. Every sensible part of him knew he should report this. The accident, the suspicious men, all of it. But something in her eyes, a familiar kind of desperation he'd seen in combat, made him nod in agreement. All right, no police tonight, but I think you owe me some kind of explanation. She looked down at her hands, elegant fingers twisting together in a gesture of anxiety that seemed at odds with her otherwise composed demeanor. I made a terrible mistake, she said softly. I trusted the wrong person. I'm running from my ex-husband, she said after a moment, offering a partial truth that Jack suspected wasn't the whole story. He's connected, powerful. The police can't help me. As if to punctuate her statement, thunder cracked overhead, and the rain intensified, drumming against the cabin roof with renewed fury. Jack moved to add another log to the fire, giving her a moment of privacy to collect herself. You should rest, he said finally. There's food in the cupboard. Water from the pump out back is clean enough to drink. Bathroom's just an outhouse. I'm afraid, but it's sturdy. We'll figure things out in the morning. She looked at him with a mixture of wariness and something like wonder. I don't understand. Most people would have handed me over or called the authorities immediately. Why are you helping me? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. You don't know me. I could be dangerous. Jack almost smiled at that. Despite the obvious intelligence in her eyes, this woman with her delicate build and refined manner was about as threatening as Scout in his current arthritic state. Let's just say I've seen enough in my lifetime to know when someone needs help. Not questions, he replied. Then, more pragmatically, there's a change of clothes in that trunk. My daughter's, from when she used to come hunting with me. They might be a bit small, but they're dry. With that, he moved to the window, carefully peering around the edge of the curtain. The storm showed no signs of abating. The forest around them transformed into a dripping, black void punctuated by occasional flashes of lightning. Good. The weather would keep those men from mounting an effective search, at least for tonight. When he turned back, Beth was examining the clothes from the trunk, a flannel shirt, jeans, and a heavy cable-knit sweater. I'll step outside while you change, Jack offered, reaching for his rain jacket. Need to check if there's any sign of our friends? She nodded gratefully, and Jack slipped out into the downpour, standing under the small overhang that sheltered the cabin's entrance. The cold rain helped clear his head as he considered the situation. He was harboring a woman clearly in serious trouble, possibly running from the law, definitely running from dangerous men. At his age, with his farm on the verge of foreclosure, he didn't need complications. The sensible thing would be to escort her to the sheriff's office in the morning. Let the proper authorities sort it out. Jack thought of his late wife Caroline, of her unwavering belief in doing what was right rather than what was easy. She dragged him to church every Sunday for 40 years, not because she was particularly religious, but because she believed in the importance of community and moral compass. What would she make of this situation, of this woman with her expensive clothes and obvious secrets? But Jack had never been particularly sensible when it came to standing by while someone suffered. It had gotten him into trouble in Vietnam, standing up for villagers when his commanding officers ordered otherwise. It had caused him headaches on the county board when he opposed developments that would hurt small farmers. And it had created tension with Rachel, his daughter, who couldn't understand why he wouldn't just sell the failing farm and move somewhere more comfortable. Stubborn as a mule, Caroline had always said, though usually with an affectionate smile that took the sting out of the words. Jack supposed she'd been right about that. At least. A soft knock on the door indicated that Beth had finished changing. Jack stepped back inside, shaking water from his jacket. She stood by the fire, Rachel's old clothes hanging somewhat loosely on her frame. With her face cleaned of mud and her hair pushed back, there was something naggingly familiar about her features, though Jack couldn't quite place it. The clothes transformed her from sophisticated urbanite to something more approachable, though she still carried herself with an innate elegance that no amount of flannel could disguise. "Thank you for the clothes," she said, gesturing to the mud-soaked garments she'd folded neatly on a chair. "And for everything else." Jack nodded, moving to the small kitchenette area to put on a pot of coffee. "Those men," he said without preamble, "they've been looking for you specifically, haven't they?" This wasn't random. Her shoulders tensed, but she nodded. "Yes. Your ex-husband sent them." "In a manner of speaking," she replied carefully. "He has resources." Jack had known men with resources in his time, the kind of men who believed money could buy anything, including people. "Must be quite a fellow," he said neutrally, measuring coffee grounds into the percolator. "You have no idea," she murmured, almost to herself. As she raised her arm to push back her hair, the sleeve of the flannel shirt slid down, revealing a pattern of bruises on her forearm, fingerprints pressed into the skin, the kind that came from being grabbed with excessive force. She quickly pulled the sleeve down when she noticed his gaze, but not before Jack had seen enough to fuel his growing anger. "Those from the car accident?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She didn't bother lying. "No." Jack set the percolator on the small propane stove with more force than necessary. "Man who puts his hands on a woman that way isn't much of a man at all." "No," she agreed quietly. "He isn't." They fell into silence as the coffee began to perk, filling the cabin with its rich aroma. Outside, the storm continued unabated, nature's fury providing cover for them both. Jack found 2 mugs, chipped but clean, and poured the coffee when it was ready. "Sugar," he offered. "Black is fine," she replied, accepting the mug with both hands, as if drawing warmth from the ceramic. Jack settled into the chair opposite her, his body reminding him of the day's exertions with various aches and twinges. The fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the cabin's interior. "You have a lovely farm," she said after a while, breaking the silence. "I noticed it before the accident. The red barn, the white farmhouse. It looked like something from a painting." Jack snorted softly. "Looks better at a distance. I expect, up close, you'd see the paint peeling on the barn and the roof that needs replacing on the house. Still," she insisted, "there's something special about it, a feeling of permanence." "Been in my family for 3 generations," Jack said, a note of pride creeping into his voice despite his best efforts. My grandfather bought it after World War II with his service pay. My father expanded it in the 70s. Now it's mine. He didn't add for now, though the thought hung in the air, unspoken. You live there alone, she asked carefully. Just me and Scout, my border collie, Jack replied. My wife, Caroline, passed 5 years ago. Cancer. My daughter, Rachel. She's in New York, works for some big marketing firm, comes home for Christmas, usually. I'm sorry about your wife, she said, genuine sympathy in her voice. Jack nodded his acknowledgement. What about you? Any family besides the ex? A shadow crossed her face. No children. Thankfully, he would have used them against me. My parents are gone. I have a sister in California, but we're not close. Alone then, Jack observed. Very, she agreed, a wry smile touching her lips briefly. They fell silent again, two strangers sharing a moment of unexpected connection in the midst of chaos. Jack found himself studying her surreptitiously, the graceful way she held herself, the thoughtful intelligence in her eyes, the hint of strength beneath the fear. Despite her current circumstances, this was a woman accustomed to commanding attention, to being listened to. What did you do before? Jack gestured vaguely, letting the question hang in the air. Beth hesitated, clearly calculating how much to reveal. I was in the arts, she said finally. Theater, primarily. It explained the poise, the careful diction. Jack nodded, not pressing for details she was clearly reluctant to provide. And you, she asked, always a farmer? No, Jack replied, surprising himself with his willingness to share. Spent 3 years in Vietnam first, Marine Corps, came home with a Purple Heart and enough nightmares to last a lifetime. Her expression softened with understanding. That explains a few things. Like what? Like how you handled those men back there, and why you didn't hesitate to help a stranger in trouble. Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the implied praise. Did what anyone would do. No, she said with quiet certainty. Not anyone. Most people would have driven past or called the police. They wouldn't have fought off armed men or carried an unconscious woman through the woods in a storm. Military training, Jack said dismissively, becomes instinct after a while. It's more than training, she insisted. It's character. Jack felt unaccountably touched by her assessment, simple as it was. Coming from this elegant stranger, with her careful words and watchful eyes, it felt like a compliment worth receiving. You should get some rest, he said eventually, noticing the exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. Take the cot. I'll keep watch for a while. She looked like she wanted to protest but was too tired to make the effort. Wake me if you hear anything, she insisted. I will, Jack promised, though he had already decided to let her sleep unless there was immediate danger. He watched as she settled onto the cot, pulling the worn quilt up around her shoulders. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into the rhythm of sleep, the lines of worry temporarily smoothed from her face. Jack added another log to the fire, then moved to the window, carefully peering out at the storm-lashed forest. He had no illusions about the danger they might be in. Men like the ones he'd encountered didn't give up easily, especially when they were being paid to do a job. Come morning, they would need to move, but for now, the storm was their ally. As he settled back into his chair, wincing at the bruise forming on his ribs, Jack wondered just what he had gotten himself into. At his age, with his responsibilities, the last thing he needed was to be harboring a woman running from powerful, dangerous men. And yet, looking at her sleeping form, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Some instinct, honed by years of watching for subtle changes in weather, in crops, in animals, told him there was more to her story than she was sharing. The bruises suggested an abusive relationship? Certainly, but the resources being deployed to find her spoke of something bigger. Those men weren't just hired muscle sent to bring back a wayward wife. They were professionals, almost paramilitary in their approach. Jack sipped his cooling coffee, gazing into the fire as the rain drummed a steady rhythm on the cabin roof. Whatever trouble Beth was in, he was now involved, for better or worse, and Jack Thornton had never been one to start something he wasn't willing to finish. The storm eventually lulled him into a light doze, years of military training allowing him to rest while remaining partially alert. It was a skill that had served him well in Vietnam and later during long nights of calving season, or when machinery needed round-the-clock monitoring during harvest. He woke fully at first light, his body protesting the night spent in the hard wooden chair. The rain had finally stopped, though water still dripped steadily from the trees surrounding the cabin. Jack stood carefully, stretching to ease the stiffness in his back and shoulders. Beth was still asleep, curled beneath the quilt, her face peaceful in repose. In the gentle morning light filtering through the curtains, the resemblance finally clicked into place. He knew why she looked familiar, though he still couldn't quite believe it. If he was right, the woman sleeping on his cot wasn't just anyone. She was Eleanor Carson, the acclaimed actress whose performance in Autumn's End had moved Caroline to tears. His late wife had been a devoted fan, following Carson's career from her early stage work through her Oscar win 5 years ago. Jack himself wasn't much for movies, but he'd accompanied Caroline to see several of Carson's films over the years, if only to share in his wife's enthusiasm. Carson had been nominated for another Academy Award just last year, he recalled, for a film about a Supreme Court justice. Caroline would have loved it, had she lived to see it. She'd always appreciated films that showcased women of substance and intelligence, not just youth and beauty, but what would a Hollywood star be doing in rural Wisconsin, running from mysterious men and claiming to be fleeing an abusive ex-husband? The tabloids Caroline occasionally indulged in had often featured stories about Carson's marriage to producer William Hayes, presenting them as Hollywood royalty. Jack had never paid much attention to such gossip, but he didn't recall any public scandals or divorce announcements. Then again, the lives of the famous were often carefully curated for public consumption, the messy realities hidden behind publicists' statements and carefully staged photo opportunities. Jack moved quietly to the kitchenette, intent on making coffee before his guest awoke. Whatever her real identity, she was clearly in genuine danger. That much had been evident in the cold efficiency of her pursuers. As he was measuring coffee grounds, a sound from outside made him freeze. The soft crunch of footsteps on wet leaves, moving slowly but deliberately toward the cabin. Jack set down the coffee canister and moved silently to the window, carefully peering around the edge of the curtain. A man in a dark jacket was making his way through the trees, a handheld radio visible at his belt. He moved with the deliberate caution of a professional, scanning his surroundings methodically as he advanced. One of the men from the previous night? No doubt. Jack's mind raced, calculating options. The cabin had only one door, but there was a small window in the back that could serve as an emergency exit if necessary. The man outside was alone, at least from what Jack could see, which suggested they had split up to search the area. Silently, Jack moved to the cot and gently shook Beth awake, pressing a finger to his lips in warning when her eyes opened. She understood immediately, rising without a sound, her expression tense but composed. "One of them?" Jack whispered, barely audible. "Outside. Get ready to move if needed." She nodded, quickly pulling on the boots he'd provided and tying her hair back. Jack was impressed by her calm efficiency. No panic, no questions, just immediate preparation. If she was indeed Eleanor Carson, she was proving to be far more capable in a crisis than one might expect from a Hollywood actress. Jack moved to the trunk where he kept emergency supplies and retrieved an old hunting knife, sliding it into his belt at the small of his back. He hadn't owned a gun since returning from Vietnam, a personal choice he was now somewhat regretting. The footsteps outside grew closer, then paused. Jack motioned for Beth to move away from the windows, positioning her behind him as he took up a stance near the door, ready to act if their visitor decided to enter. Long seconds ticked by. Then, the radio at the man's belt crackled to life, the sound clearly audible through the cabin's thin walls. "Sector 4 clear," a voice reported. "Moving to Grid 5. Their visitor raised his radio. Copy that. Nothing at the farmhouse or barn. Continuing sweep of the wooded area. His voice was the same clinical, professional tone Jack remembered from the previous night. The footsteps resumed, but to Jack's relief, they began moving away from the cabin, continuing deeper into the forest. He waited until the sound had faded completely before allowing himself to relax slightly. "They're searching the entire property," he said quietly. "Found the farmhouse already." "I need to go," she insisted, her voice tight with tension. "Now, while they're spread out searching," Jack shook his head. "That's exactly what they're hoping for. Better to wait until they've cleared this area and moved on." She paced the small confines of the cabin like a caged animal. "I can't stay here. I'm putting you in danger. These men, they won't hesitate to hurt you if they think you're helping me." "I'm already helping you," Jack pointed out. "That ship sailed when I pulled you from that car. Now we need to be smart about our next move." She stopped pacing, fixing him with a direct gaze. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "Then enlighten me," Jack challenged, "starting with who you really are." "Ms. Carson?" Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with calculation. "How long have you known?" "Just figured it out this morning," Jack admitted. "My late wife was a fan of yours. Saw most of your films." Eleanor Carson, for it was indeed her, sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. "I suppose I should have expected to be recognized eventually. What I can't figure," Jack continued, "is why Eleanor Carson is running from armed men through rural Wisconsin, claiming to be fleeing an abusive ex-husband. Last I heard, you were still married to that producer fellow." "William Hayes," she supplied, her voice taking on a harder edge. "And yes, technically we're still married, though divorce papers have been filed." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "He's the one who sent those men, not to bring me home for a loving reconciliation. I assure you," Jack's expression darkened. "The bruises," Eleanor nodded, unconsciously rubbing her forearm where the fingerprint bruises were hidden by the flannel sleeve. "That's part of it. William has always been controlling, demanding, but when I finally stood up to him, threatened to leave publicly." She trailed off, her gaze distant with painful memories. "He got physical," Jack finished for her. "Yes, though always careful never to mark me where it would show for cameras." The bitter pragmatism in her tone spoke volumes about the calculated nature of the abuse. Jack's estimation of William Hayes, already low, plummeted further. "And the police," Eleanor gave a humorless laugh. "William Hayes is one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. He has judges, police captains, and politicians on speed dial. He makes seven-figure donations to the Police Benevolent Fund every year. Who do you think they would believe?" It was a cynical assessment, but one Jack couldn't entirely dismiss. Money and power had a way of warping justice, even in the supposed land of the free. "So you ran," he observed. "I had to," she confirmed. "But there's more to it than just the abuse. I have something William wants very badly. Something that could destroy him if it became public." Jack raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. Eleanor seemed to debate with herself, then reached into the pocket of the jeans she wore and withdrew a small object, a thumb drive, unremarkable except for what it apparently contained. "Evidence," she said simply, "not just of what he did to me, but what he's done to dozens of young actresses over the years. Financial records of payoffs and NDAs, security footage from his office and home, testimony from victims who've been too afraid to come forward." Jack's eyes widened slightly as he grasped the implications. "You're saying he's a predator," she finished firmly. "One who's used his power and influence to silence victims for decades. I started gathering evidence when I realized what was happening, but I needed enough to make sure he couldn't just buy his way out of it. When he discovered what I was doing," she gestured to her bruised arm, "that was the final straw." The pieces fell into place for Jack, the desperation of her flight, the resources being deployed to find her, the danger she was in. This wasn't just about an abusive husband trying to control his wife. It was about a powerful man trying to prevent his crimes from being exposed. "Those men outside," Jack said, "they're not just looking for you. They're looking for that." He nodded toward the thumb drive. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "I was on my way to meet with federal prosecutors. Real ones. Not the kind those men were pretending to be. I have a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office who's willing to take the case despite Williams' connections. But Williams' people have been tracking me since I left Los Angeles. I've been staying one step ahead, changing vehicles, using cash only, until yesterday." Jack processed this information, his military training automatically analyzing threat levels and contingencies. "How did they find you?" he asked, a critical piece of the puzzle still missing. Eleanor's expression clouded with frustration. "I'm not sure. I've been so careful. The car was paid for in cash, registered under a false name. I've avoided cameras, kept my head down. The only thing I can think of is—" She trailed off, a realization dawning. "My medication. I had it filled at a pharmacy in Springfield 2 days ago. I used my insurance card without thinking." "What medication?" Jack asked, his tone not judgmental but practical, assessing potential vulnerabilities. Eleanor hesitated only briefly. "I've had anxiety issues since things with William escalated. My doctor prescribed something to help me sleep." Jack nodded grimly. It was the kind of small human error that often proved fatal in combat situations. One moment of automatic behavior, and the carefully constructed cover was blown. "Makes sense," he said. "Most folks don't think about medical records being accessible to those with resources, especially when you're already stressed and not sleeping well." She looked surprised by his understanding, perhaps expecting judgment or criticism for the slip. "I should have known better," she said, angry at herself. "I've been so careful about everything else. No point beating yourself up about it now," Jack said practically. "What's done is done. The question is, what's the plan now? These men aren't going to give up easily." Eleanor straightened, determination replacing fear in her expression. "I still need to get to Madison. My contact is waiting there. Once the evidence is in official hands, William loses his advantage. He can't silence the entire Justice Department. Madison's about 3 hours from here," Jack calculated, "but we can't take the main roads. They'll be watching." Eleanor caught his use of "we," but didn't comment on it directly. "I can find another way. Perhaps a bus from the next town over." "They'll be watching the bus stations," Jack countered, "and the rental car agencies, and the airports. Men like that, they're thorough." "Then what do you suggest?" There was a challenge in her voice, but also a willingness to listen that Jack appreciated. "I need to go into town," he said after a moment's consideration. "Check in at the farm, see what those men are up to, maybe get some supplies. You stay here, out of sight. I'll come back, and we'll figure out our next move." Eleanor looked like she wanted to argue but seemed to recognize the logic in his suggestion. "All right, but if you're not back by noon, I'm leaving. I can't risk staying in one place too long." Jack nodded, understanding her caution. "Fair enough. Keep the door bolted. Don't make a fire. The smoke would be visible. There's food in the cupboard and water from the pump. If you hear anyone approaching, there's a space under the floorboards in the corner." He pointed to a nearly invisible seam in the wooden floor. "My father built it during the Cold War. Paranoid old man thought the Russians might come looking for him someday." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Seems his paranoia might save his daughter-in-law." The light just surprised Jack, revealing a resilience he admired. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." He gathered a few items, his pocket knife, a small flashlight, a baseball cap to shield his face somewhat, and prepared to leave. At the door, he paused, turning back to Eleanor. "I still don't understand why you're helping me," she said quietly. "This isn't your fight." Jack considered the question seriously. "Maybe I'm tired of watching people with power and money take whatever they want without consequences. Maybe I've got nothing much left to lose anyway. Or maybe he added with the faintest hint of a smile. I just can't stand the thought of Caroline looking down from wherever she is and seeing me turn away someone she admired. Eleanor's expression softened. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, Jack agreed simply. Her favorite film of yours was The Glass Hour. Made me watch it 3 times. Eleanor looked genuinely touched. That was my first major role. It wasn't a commercial success, but it's still the work I'm most proud of. She said it had heart, Jack recalled. Said you played the part like you understood what it meant to lose everything and keep going anyway. At the time, it was just acting, Eleanor said softly. Life has a way of catching up to art. It seems. The moment stretched between them, an unexpected connection in the midst of crisis. Noon, Jack finally said, more briskly. If I'm not back, don't wait. With that, he slipped out of the cabin and into the dripping forest, moving with the careful silence that had once been second nature during jungle patrols half a lifetime ago. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, the morning sun beginning to break through in dappled patches between the trees. Jack took a circuitous route, avoiding the most direct path back to the farmhouse in case Hayes's men were still searching the woods. His mind worked through the implications of what Eleanor had told him, anger building slowly as he considered the abuse she and others had suffered at William Hayes's hands. Jack had never been much for celebrity news or Hollywood gossip, but even he knew Hayes was one of the industry's most powerful figures, a producer and studio executive whose films regularly won awards and generated hundreds of millions in revenue. The kind of man accustomed to getting his way, to being untouchable. As he neared the edge of the woods, Jack slowed his pace, scanning the open ground between the tree line and his farmhouse. The red barn stood as it always had, solid and dependable against the clearing sky. The white farmhouse, its paint indeed peeling in places, looked peaceful enough. His ancient pickup truck was parked where he'd left it yesterday, and there was no sign of the black SUVs from the previous night. But something felt wrong. Scout wasn't in the yard where he should be, greeting the morning with his usual inspection of the property. The farmhouse door stood slightly ajar, though Jack was certain he'd closed it before heading out to check the fields yesterday. He remained at the edge of the trees, watching and waiting. Years of farming had taught him patience. Sometimes the most important thing was to observe before acting. After 10 minutes of careful surveillance, he spotted movement. A man in dark clothing moving past one of the farmhouse windows. They were still here, as he'd suspected, lying in wait. Jack withdrew deeper into the cover of the forest, considering his options. He needed to get to town, to gather information and supplies, but his truck was in plain view of the farmhouse. Using it would immediately alert Hayes's men to his presence. He could go on foot, but the nearest town, Millridge, was 5 miles away, a long walk that would leave Eleanor alone at the cabin for too long. Then he remembered the old ATV he kept in the equipment shed behind the barn. It wasn't ideal for road travel, but it would get him to town faster than walking, and the shed had a rear door that wasn't visible from the farmhouse. Moving carefully around the perimeter of his property, staying within the tree line, Jack made his way toward the back of the barn. The morning had fully broken now, the sun burning away the mist that had settled in the fields overnight. He paused frequently, scanning for any sign of Hayes's men, but they seemed to be concentrating their presence at the farmhouse, likely assuming he would return there eventually. Jack reached the equipment shed without incident and slipped inside through the rear door. The familiar smells of oil, metal, and hay greeted him, the sense of a working farm that had been his life for so long. The ATV sat in the corner, covered with a tarp. Jack hadn't used it in months, but he kept all his equipment maintained out of habit. He checked it quickly, fuel level, tire pressure, battery, then pushed it quietly toward the door. Just as he was about to start the engine, a soft whine from the darkness of the barn caught his attention. Jack turned to find Scout emerging from behind a stack of hay bales, tail wagging hesitantly. "Hey, old boy," Jack whispered, relief flooding through him as he crouched to pet the border collie. "Smart dog, hiding out here." Scout pressed against his leg, clearly disturbed by the strangers who had invaded their home. Jack noticed a small cut on the dog's muzzle, as if he'd been struck or had gotten into a scuffle. The discovery fueled Jack's anger. These men had hurt his dog, invaded his home, and were pursuing a woman who was clearly a victim. The list of grievances was growing. "Stay here," he instructed, pointing to the hay bales. Scout obediently returned to his hiding spot, though his expressive eyes conveyed clear disapproval at being left behind. Jack started the ATV, wincing at the noise of the engine, then quickly guided it out the back door and down a narrow tractor path that led away from the farm toward the county road. He took a roundabout route to avoid being seen from the farmhouse, cutting through the neighbor's field with a mental apology to old Bob Erickson for the trespass. Once on the county road, Jack opened the throttle, the ATV bouncing over the uneven asphalt as he headed toward Millridge. The cool morning air whipped at his face, carrying with it the familiar sense of his world. Rich soil, growing crops, the occasional whiff of dairy cows from the farms he passed. This land was in his blood, had been since his childhood, and the thought of losing it to foreclosure felt like a physical pain. Yet here he was, risking what little he had left to help a woman he barely knew. A Hollywood actress with troubles that should have been worlds away from his simple life. Jack couldn't help but wonder what Caroline would make of his current situation. She'd probably call him a fool, but she'd say it with that fond smile that had always made everything worthwhile. The morning sun climbed higher as he drove, promising a beautiful autumn day after the violence of yesterday's storm. The fields on either side of the road gleamed with moisture, the corn stalks standing tall and golden, ready for harvest. In a normal year, Jack would be focused entirely on getting his crops in before the weather turned, on preparing the farm for winter. Instead, he found himself embroiled in a dangerous situation that felt more like his military past than his farming present. Millridge appeared in the distance, a small town that had seen better days. The main street consisted of a handful of businesses: the general store, a diner, the bank that held his mortgage, a small pharmacy, and various other establishments that somehow survived despite the economic challenges facing rural America. People here knew him, had known his father before him. It was the kind of place where everyone's business was common knowledge, which could be both a blessing and a curse in his current situation. Jack parked the ATV behind Miller's general store, out of sight from the main street. He adjusted his cap lower over his eyes, not out of any real expectation of disguise. In a town this size and everyone would recognize him anyway, but more as a signal that he wasn't in a chatty mood. The bell above the door jingled as he entered the store. Dan Miller, whose family had owned the place for generations, looked up from behind the counter where he was sorting mail. "Jack," he greeted with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. "Didn't expect to see you on an ATV. Truck giving you trouble?" "Something like that," Jack replied noncommittally. "Need a few supplies." Dan nodded, returning to his mail sorting as Jack moved through the store, gathering the items he needed. More first aid supplies, some non-perishable food, batteries, a flashlight. As he was selecting a burner phone from a small display, an essential item given the circumstances, Sheriff Mike Holden entered the store. Jack tensed slightly but nodded a greeting to the sheriff, a man he'd known since high school. They'd played football together, had once been close friends, though their paths had diverged over the years. Mike had supported some of the development projects Jack had opposed during his time on the county board, creating a slight coolness in their relationship, but they maintained the outward friendliness expected in a small community. "Jack," Mike acknowledged, his expression unreadable beneath his regulation mustache. "Heard you might have had some excitement out at your place." Jack kept his face neutral as he added the phone to his basket. "That's so. What kind of excitement?" Mike glanced around the store, then jerked his head toward the door. "Got a minute?" Jack followed him outside, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Had Hayes's men contacted local law enforcement? Was Mike already compromised? "Some fellas came by the station this morning," Mike said once they were standing beside his patrol car. "Said they were FBI, looking for a fugitive. Woman wanted for industrial espionage or some such. Claimed she might be in the area. He studied Jack's face carefully. Said they'd already checked with the farms along County Road 27, including yours. Jack maintained his neutral expression. Lot of excitement for Milridge. Thing is, Mike continued, lowering his voice, these boys didn't quite feel right to me. Had the talk, had some kind of badges, but he shrugged. Been sheriff here for 18 years. Met my share of federal agents. These ones felt off. Jack felt a surge of hope at this unexpected development. Perhaps his old friend wasn't as easily fooled as Hayes's men had expected. They mentioned why they thought this fugitive might be around here, he asked casually. Mike nodded. Said she was tracked to this area before they lost her, driving a silver sedan. He paused meaningfully. Like the one that went off the road near your east field during the storm last night. So they knew about the accident. Jack weighed his options carefully. Mike might be genuinely suspicious of Hayes's men, or this could be an attempt to draw Jack out. Road gets treacherous in that kind of rain, Jack commented. Wouldn't be the first accident on that stretch. No, Mike agreed. It wouldn't. He studied Jack for a long moment. These fellas asked specifically about you. Jack. Wanted to know if you'd been into town, who your friends are, that sort of thing. Said it was routine, but he trailed off significantly. Appreciate the heads up, Jack said, making a decision. Mike had been straight with him. He deserved some measure of honesty in return. I'd steer clear of them if I were you. Mike, don't think they're what they claim to be. Mike's eyes narrowed slightly. You in some kind of trouble. Jack, not me, Jack replied carefully. But someone might be, someone who needs help, not FBI agents with questionable credentials. The sheriff absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. These fellas are staying at the Milridge Inn. Got 2 black SUVs in the parking lot. They've been asking around town, showing a photograph. He hesitated, then added, pretty lady, dark hair with some silver in it, green eyes, kind of familiar looking, though I couldn't place her. Jack kept his expression neutral, though his heart rate increased. They had photos of Eleanor, and they were canvassing the town. Time was running short. Thanks for the information, he said, genuinely grateful for his old friend's discretion. Mike nodded, then lowered his voice further. Jack, if you're mixed up in something, I should know about it. Officially. Better you don't, Jack replied honestly. For now, anyway. But I promise you, Mike, I'm on the right side of this one. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Always were a stubborn son of a bitch. He glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. Those fellas asked about that old hunting cabin of yours. I told them I didn't know of any cabin on your property. The implication was clear. Mike was giving him a warning and, in his own way, offering help. Jack felt a surge of gratitude for small-town loyalties that still counted for something. Appreciate that, he said simply. Mike leaned closer, his voice dropping further. Listen, Jack. I've been sheriff here long enough to know when something stinks. These men may have badges, but they're not following any protocol I've ever seen. They've got no warrants, no official documentation beyond some flimsy ID cards, and they're asking a lot of questions about a certain Hollywood actress who's supposedly gone missing. Jack's pulse quickened. Is that so? Yeah. Now, I'm not saying you know anything about Eleanor Carson disappearing from her latest film set, or why she might be in Wisconsin instead of on location in Toronto. But if you did, Mike let the sentence hang meaningfully. I'd be careful, Jack finished for him. Damn right you would, because men like that, with resources like that, they don't play by the rules. Mike straightened up, resuming his official demeanor. You be careful, Jack, and whatever's going on, try to keep it out of my jurisdiction. Don't put me in a position where I have to choose between our history and my badge. Understood, Jack agreed. With a final nod, Mike returned to his patrol car and drove away, leaving Jack with mixed feelings of relief and increased urgency. He quickly finished his shopping, adding a few additional items that might prove useful given the new information. As he was paying, Dan Miller leaned across the counter. "Those government fellas been asking about you," he said in a low voice, showing a picture of some woman, "seemed mighty interested in your comings and goings." News traveled fast in Millridge, as always. "That right," Jack replied noncommittally. Dan nodded, bagging Jack's purchases. "Told him you keep to yourself mostly, especially since Caroline passed. Didn't mention Rachel was coming to visit. Figured that wasn't their business." Jack froze in the act of counting out cash. "Rachel's coming to visit." Dan looked surprised. "That's what she said when she called yesterday. Asked if we still carry those almond cookies she likes. Said she'd be in town today or tomorrow. Thought you knew?" Jack's mind raced. Rachel hadn't mentioned any plans to visit when they'd spoken last week. She rarely came home these days. Claiming her job kept her too busy. And now, with Hayes's men searching for Eleanor and watching his farm, his daughter was walking into potential danger. "Thanks, Dan," he said, collecting his bags. "Appreciate the heads up." Outside, Jack stowed his purchases in the small storage compartment of the ATV, his thoughts churning. He needed to warn Rachel, tell her to postpone her visit, but he couldn't risk using his regular phone. Hayes's men might already be monitoring it. The burner phone would work, but not until he activated it away from town, where he wouldn't be observed. As he was about to start the ATV, a silver luxury car pulled into the parking space nearby, a stark contrast to the practical trucks and sedans that typically populated Millridge. The driver's door opened, and a man in an expensive suit emerged, his posture radiating confident authority. Jack instinctively stepped back, positioning himself partly behind the ATV, his hand moving to the pocket knife in his jacket. Something about the man's bearing set off warning bells. This wasn't just some lost city tourist or traveling salesman. The newcomer was perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair expertly cut and styled, his suit clearly tailored to his trim frame. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge, to having his orders followed without question. His face, while handsome in a conventional way, held a coldness in the eyes that Jack recognized from his military days. The look of someone who viewed others as objects rather than people. The man surveyed the street with the calculated assessment of someone used to evaluating new territory. His gaze briefly passed over Jack without lingering, dismissing him as just another local. That suited Jack fine. Being underestimated had its advantages. The suited man entered the diner across the street, but Jack remained tense. Another player in this dangerous game had just arrived in Millridge, and Jack doubted it was a coincidence. He needed to get back to Eleanor, warn her about the new developments, and somehow contact Rachel before she arrived at a farm currently under surveillance by dangerous men. As he started the ATV, Jack noticed a younger man exit the diner and speak briefly into a cell phone while looking in the direction the silver car had gone. A lookout, possibly. The situation was escalating, with more of Hayes's people arriving in Millridge. They were closing the net, and time was running short. With a sense of growing urgency, Jack headed out of town, taking a different route than the one he'd used to arrive. The morning had advanced toward noon, the sun now high in a sky washed clean by yesterday's storm. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect day for fieldwork, for the honest labor that had defined his life. Instead, Jack Thornton found himself in the middle of a dangerous situation more suited to the jungles of Vietnam than the peaceful farmlands of Wisconsin. Yet as he guided the ATV along back roads toward his property, he felt a strange sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Not since Caroline's illness had given him a clear enemy to fight, one that had ultimately proven unbeatable. This time, the enemy was human, corruptible, and fallible. And Jack intended to ensure that William Hayes discovered just how problematic one stubborn old farmer could be when he decided to take a stand. The autumn winds sweep across Sunset Ridge Farm, rustling through corn stalks that stand tall once more. Where floodwater once threatened to drown a legacy, New life takes root. The red barn wears fresh paint now, its weathered boards no longer bearing the weight of impending loss. They called it a scandal in the headlines, how a Hollywood icon and a Vietnam veteran farmer brought down one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. They spoke of evidence delivered, of justice served in wood-paneled courtrooms far from these quiet fields. What they didn't tell was how courage looks when it stands in a storm, refusing to bend. How strength is measured not in box office numbers or acres owned, but in the decision to stand between danger and the vulnerable. How two souls from worlds apart recognized in each other something worth fighting for. Eleanor found her voice again, not just on screen but in the halls of power where her testimony changed laws. Jack found purpose beyond survival, his land becoming sanctuary for those who needed shelter from their own storms. In the end, perhaps that's what defines us, not the battles we're forced to fight, but the strangers we choose to protect when the rain falls hardest and the night grows darkest. Some storms wash away, others transform.